and welcome to Africa's Vision Network. Africa's Vision Network features African cultural awareness, education, economic empowerment, religion, spirituality, and other issues dealing with the African world. I am Princess Ayo, your host for the show. And we have a most interesting show this evening, as we usually do. You're used to me saying that. Probably 4 years now I've said this show is really exciting. But this particular show, I must say, from pre-meetings with this amazing person, is going to be really interesting. And is about a country that you don't usually hear about, the great country of Sudan. And I was researching about Sudan today, and I came across a wonderful phrase that said, 9 countries on this planet have one thing in common. What is it? And it is that they border Sudan. And we have with us Mr. Abdelbagi Kabir, Ambassador, Minister, Deputy Chief of Missions, Embassy of the Republic of Sudan. And we're so glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
We're really thrilled. We know that you will be the best person to give us all this information about your fabulous country after I read about who you are and what your background is like. Now, the Republic of Sudan is around 1/3 the size of the United States. It is located in northern East Central Africa, bordering the Red Sea between Egypt and Eritrea. The land is divided into 4 distinct geographical regions: deserts in the north, steppes and low mountains in central Sudan to the south, a vast swamp known as the Sud to the central south, and to the central south is rainforest. So it's a very diverse geographical area. The River Nile, flowing from south to north, is a central feature of the country. Sudan's population is composed of 2 distinct cultures, Black, African, and Arabs, as far as we know. And if we are wrong, I know the ambassador will correct us. Black Africans of diverse ethnicity make up the majority and mostly concentrated in the south, and the Arabic-speaking Muslims belonging to several ethnic groups are located mainly in the northern and central regions. And we will learn more from our guests. Mr. Kabir is a native Sudanese, born in Dilling, Sudan. He has served as co-founder and secretary of the Indigenous Council, Netherlands, co-signatory to Nuba Mountains Peace Agreement, Sudan, deputy director of Technical Cooperation Department, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Khartoum, Sudan, deputy director of Peace and Humanitarian Affairs Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Khartoum, Sudan. He currently serves as Foreign Secretary and spokesman for Sudan People Liberation Movement, a Nuba Mountains faction, Sudan, and member of the Transitional Council for Peace for Southern Kordofan in Sudan. He has a Bachelor of Science in Engineering, postgraduate diploma in Development Planning, and a diploma in, of all things, Turkish and Dutch languages. And he is married to a Christian woman. He is Muslim, and they have 2 fabulous children, I'm sure. Welcome again to Africa's Vision Network.
Well, thank you very much.
We're so excited to have you here to enlighten us about this fabulous country that now my audience will be able to say they know something about after this 30 minutes that we're going to be with them. Mr. Kabir, share with our audience how you got to this place in your life.
Well, I think to start with, I must really express my profound appreciation to all the good words you said about the Sudan and the facts that you stated and all those good words you were saying. I would have been able to do myself. Mm-hmm. But I came here through, I wonder if it's a leap or a javelin. But for sure, it has been a long journey. Mm. I could say that you've done a quite good homework on my background.
Yeah,
some
we
of them
in.
I was not even aware of. But in fact, there's only a slight correction I want to make on you know, because it's true, I have been the spokesman and foreign secretary for the Nuba Mountains faction that signed a peace agreement. And by that fact, it became a part and parcel of the government. It's true, the agreement is still holding, and the Transitional Council for Peace in the Nuba Mountains is still there. And so this is just to make a distinction that it's not a separate entity. It's a part and parcel of the government. And at this stage now, though it's a transitional period which has been just renewed 2 months ago for additional 3 years, and that is, of course, pursuit of peace.
Yeah.
But
that was a victory for you and your group.
Indeed, it's a victory for the people of Sudan that we had to really come down to our senses and stop the bloodshed. And that was in 1997, and after active 8 years with the SPLA under John Garang's command. And though I wasn't in the front line as a soldier, but we were taking care of the political movement on the SPLM, which is actually superior to that work in the Dunning. And then we had to take matters into our hands and move into addressing the case of the Nuba Mountains from a rather more objective, angle. And that got us in no time into a peace agreement in 1997, along other 6 or 7 factions from the southern Sudan. And of course, the Nuba Mountains, when speaking of Nuba Mountains, I could see that you have made some clear distinctions between the Arab North and the
correct us
blacks.
On that. We don't know. That's why you're here.
Yeah, I'm very much honored to say that it's a good opportunity to educate people who do not know. And I have a strong conviction that those who have such views, they must definitely be acting on goodwill and the information that has been available to them. And my job here now is to tell you is that there is no such distinction. And the greatest mistake that somebody makes is trying to, when a person is trying to get a clear demarcation and right angles, different in Sudan, because as I'm saying, as you just said it, I belong to the absolute majority as far as religion is concerned in the country. But I also belong to the absolute majority as far as the absolute of the absolute, if I could say, because all the Sudanese are Africans. Because, Africa is rather a place, it's not a race. So or even those fair-complexioned Egyptians and Moroccans or all those in North Africa, in fact, they're Africans. And for those of us who are black in skin, yes, we now think of, when you say African, that it's a connotation of black. So for that matter, I could accept saying that, that's why I'm saying that majority of the Sudanese are African, because the one you call Arabs, the ones just look like you. And I don't see you anything other than African. So there is no such a difference if you speak of Arab North and black South. Of course, it's only among ourselves that we could distinguish the slight differences. But when you say black, it's relative to white. And in Sudan, we don't have white in Sudan. We have people with a slight lighter complexions, So this is also very important. But it's true that Sudan is a bridge. When you look at it in the Middle East, you look, Arabs in the Middle East and Africa, starting from the south of Egypt, even if you want to see it for that matter. So from that perspective, I think.
So maybe that is a reason why many of the audience and Americans tend not to see Sudan as so African. They tend to see them as Arabs. And of course, with what's going on in the world today, since 9/11, and some statements by people in government, Sudan is Arab, Muslim against us. So, maybe that is part of the fallacy there. Yeah,
part of the fallacy actually is what, the groups which have been really waging that campaign is actually, and this is part of the legacy of the colonial era, that we have inherited different problems, in all African countries. If you just think of Nigeria, for example, a great country, great people, they had to go through Biafra, same people, good people. And if you have to think of South Africa, think of Congo, think of Tanzania, when you're speaking about Tanganyika and you're speaking about Zanzibar. And this is just simply the same people. So in Sudan, we're no different than others. In fact, because we were the where the British have to go to Lake Victoria. They went through Sudan to discover that Lake Victoria. So the legacy of the colonial era was that we inherited that, demarcations between people, and it was mainly made by the Britons, to the British to make it easy for them to rule the country, and that's what you used to call divide and conquer. And of course, the post-independence governments, national governments, didn't do much to change most of that legacy.
Right.
And so it's, but today, as I'm standing here, by the definition of those who decided to label us as black and Arabs and so, I speak for the majority of the country. I speak for people in the north, I speak for people in the technical, I'm in the north, geographically I'm in the center. As far as those people are concerned, I'm from the south. So I'm not of both, I'm just a Sudanese. And this is the new trend that we have in Sudan.
So Sudanese today are not buying into this idea of
absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's defeating itself. I'm here representing a government which now people are labeled say it's Arab, it's Islamic, and in myself I have a continuous, very fabulous religious dialogue in my house and harmony in my own home for the past 5 years. Very happy, and I can't be happier. And that will tell you, and this is the ordinary Sudanese lives.
Wow.
It's true, we have a war in the country that started even before the independence of Sudan. And the importance of Sudan is that it's the first sub-Saharan African country that got independence in 1956. Actually, officially celebrated in 1956, but independence was granted in 1953. And prior to that, in 1885, we had an independent state. That was Sudan during the Mahdi's time. And prior to that, in 7th century BC, we had a kingdom of Napta, we have the Meroic, and I mean, you have to see the pyramids over here speaking for themselves. So it's a country that has a very long history, a very deep history that goes back 8,000 years. But currently now, we could not manifest this one, we could not portray this one the way we really wish, like, just like the rest of other African countries, that we are embounced in conflicts and some other parts of Africa have their own problems. But in Sudan, we're having a problem with the war.
Right.
And so far, as I'm standing here and I was sitting, speak for that sound and definitely change in that line of war towards peace.
So, growing up in Sudan, when you were a young man, now I understand, because I was reading this profile and I'm thinking, how did he get from being in a liberation movement to being the ambassador, which is such an establishment role? But now you've explained that they've come together, and I just want to know, what was it like for you growing up as a child in Sudan?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's just, thinking of a hot sun. And I'm also very opportune because I lived in Khartoum, I lived in the Noble Mountains, I've been to the north of the Sudan. When in Khartoum, when you speak of the north, you speak of the desert in the north. I went to the Red Sea, went some parts of the south. So to
when
me,
you were young,
when I was young,
went.
Yeah, when I was young, and when I was even in high school and junior secondary school, I love traveling. And to me, the country is all mine, and people are all, they're just different, just like the way people are different anywhere.
Right.
And moving from that rebel, going into the rebel up through the high school and go to the university, and was a normal, growth like any other African young man who was really aspiring to finish education and take care of the family, those extended families that would never have end.
Yes, I do know that part.
Which we do it very proudly, of course.
Yes.
And that's what makes us very special. It's very different, that the family values. And this is what now we find that the Sudan of today, that there is a sort of a return to the morals. Even the labels and the proclamation of the government. I mean, by the time we joined the government in 1996 and 1997, we signed a peace agreement. What we come to witness, right, of the difference, that people tend to come back to become more spiritual. You have more Christians in Sudan now than you had them 10 years ago.
Okay, this was interesting because when we were talking before, we were talking about the religions, and I said, the Muslims are. Islam is the majority religion there.
Absolutely.
And you said there were other religions. Tell us about them.
Well, you have, a typical indigenous, beliefs.
And what are
I
they,
don't think if I
what
could
is
call
that
them
about?
religion. I'm not a theologian anyway, but for sure, when we say religion, as a Muslim, I speak about Christianity, I speak about Judaism, I speak about Islam.
Okay.
Others are beliefs or norms, or you name them.
That are old traditional?
So this is, but as an African, those are, we call them also indigenous African beliefs and traditional rituals. And to a very, a while ago, my mom was very indigenously African.
Okay.
And now she's a very good Muslim, in
Muslim,
her late 80s maybe.
Okay.
So but she had been free all the time. Nobody asked her to do whichever, different than what she grew up to do. So and this is what you have in the south, and this is what you have in the central part of Sudan, where I'm from, the Nuba Mountains, and you have them also some parts of the eastern Sudan, with the southern borders. So
now, where are the Nubia Mountains in Sudan? Is it the central part?
in fact, that is call it the belt.
Okay.
Because
that's a good analogy for us to remember.
It's the belt because it ties the north with the south.
Okay.
When you speak of geography.
Okay.
And it's also a sort of a melting pot. Okay. Because Sudan is a microcosm of Africa. If you think of America as a microcosm of the world, right, you see every race, every ethnic, every belief you see in the United States. In Sudan, in fact, you see every part of Africa.
Right, because all those countries border you.
And
so
even those who didn't border us, people from Nigeria, we have Niger between Sudan and Nigeria, I believe. We have people from Nigeria who used to come to, olden days, go to Mecca. Okay. People used to travel by road, and they just stay there, and they're full-time Sudanese, and they have, they're just Sudanese. It's just like when you think of different tribes in Nigeria or in South Africa. So in Sudan, you have almost all the all groups in Sudan, and as you have stated in the beginning, you have all the climates also. You have them in Sudan.
Yeah, all melded together.
Sudan that Nuba Mountains is just seeing Sudan. You have people from the north of the country who came to the Nuba Mountains because it's a very fertile area, right. And you have people from the south also coming up, and you have religions being, you have in one family you can have 3 religions. You can have Christian, Muslims, and none of those.
Marry each
absolutely,
other.
absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And we were talking before we had a whole other show before you all came on where I had my own education going on about Sudan, and you were talking about the pyramids in Sudan. Now, we don't usually think about there being pyramids in Sudan.
Well, actually, I'm wondering if Sudan, if there is anything good about Sudan thought about in it. Yes. Because, the people who are active against the Sudan and who are against the government in Sudan, they mix everything. I mean, they've never been saying good things about Sudan, just like Africa. I mean, nobody's talking good about Africa. It's always hungry.
There's something wrong.
Nobody's talking about the Great Falls. Nobody's talking about, the beautiful mountains. Nobody's talking about the wildlife. Nobody's talking about the diamonds. The good things. It's always a hungry African that you see. So it's the same case with Sudan. I mean, you talk about the pyramids there was an Italian, actually, those pyramids you see in front of there, there was an Italian there were about 60 of them, those pyramids. And there was an Italian, I understand, he discovered there was gold inside. So he didn't know in which one of them. He had to chop the heads of the pyramids. Just to find in the last one, I understand. So it is also, people who study anthropology, they're talking about those pyramids. There are even claims that they could be even, pre-Egyptians. Because in 623 BC, we were ruling Egypt. The Nubians were ruling Egypt. Wow. And when you speak of Nubia, you're speaking of certain part of Egypt. And because of Sudan has never, enjoyed stability as such, to sit down to talk about the history, talk about its role in a culture, its role in the liberation of Africa. Because in fact, all the African leaders, especially from Southern Africa, they had started from Sudan. Mozambique was from Sudan. Mandela, his first passport was from Sudan. In fact, he was arrested upon his return from Khartoum. Maria Makeba, I believe she still has a Sudanese passport. So it's that history we have, and we are co-founders, first 3 founders of the OAU, and the African, Football Association, and also pioneers in women's rights. We have women we have at least 5.
You all had the earlier queens.
Indeed.
When the rest of Africa was still having only kings.
I wouldn't be surprised if Shaba was from there as well, too.
Probably. You know, in the United States, they have this history which everyone knows about slavery. So everybody's very, very sensitive about that issue of slavery. And if we've listened to the news, and like you say, they talk about the negative about us first before the positive, and we've heard about this slavery that's going on in Sudan. Just tell us what's happening.
Well, to start with, it's, first of all, it's quite unfortunate, that people in this century now, we're in the 22nd century, right? And we are speaking, the 21st century, and we're speaking about slavery.
That we're even using the word.
And in the United States, this word has its own magic. With the blacks, the African descents, because they were being brutalized. They were, you know, all the bad things you could think of, and all the vocabulary that can be used. And for the white Americans, because they also see some relief, kind of. So it kind of satisfies all sects of spectrum here in the United States. But then it's Sudan that should pay that price. It's quite unfair, because to start with, when you speak of slavery to an average American or anybody in America, it means bondage, killing, you know, lynching, and servitude, and you just name it. Okay, this does not exist in the Sudan. I could equally say even not anywhere in the world today, and for sure not in the Sudan that we all now, you know, trying to learn to know. People have used this word to tarnish the image of the government. Sadly enough, you know, some have been used. You know, some of Sudanese have been used by certain organizations, Christian Solidarity International, Baroness Cox, who claim to have been freeing slaves. You know,
so
and,
what
and
is
funny
really,
enough?
who are these people? What is really happening with it?
These people, in fact, the so-called liberation movement, in its pursuit to undermine the government, they turn the government. You know, but in real sense, they're turning the image of the entire country of something that does not exist. And what I'm sure about is there are human rights violations in the country, and it is not a part of the tradition of the country, but it's because we have a war. There's a war that's been going on since 1955. I wasn't even born yet. Okay?
And this war is going on right now.
Continued for 17
Still going
years.
on now.
No, it continued for 17 years, and then we got peace in 1972 for 10 more years, or 71, 72. In 1983, re-erupted, and this is the war which has continued from 83. Since 83, this war has survived 4 successive governments of different orientations. From the far most liberal government ever to pass in Sudan was Nimeri, who was an ally of the United States. In fact, he was toppled while he was in the United States. Okay, and we had a transitional government as well, to a military government. This rebels survived it. We had also a democratically elected government for 3 years that the war survived it. So it has been shifting its agenda, that the rebel movement has been shifting its agenda. And then eventually they found this magical word, the slavery, which does not exist in Sudan. But what does actually exist, which we could acknowledge, and we're actually doing something about it, is a tribal abduction, which is something, unfortunately, that as Africans that do exist in so many parts of Africa, and it doesn't have to do with religion, or you have to be from different
tribes.
Different tribe.
Okay.
But it's not also rampant as people are talking about it, you know, because it is between the southern groups themselves, it is between the northern groups themselves. In fact, if you look into the Sudan.net, you will see that there's some, you know, villages that have been burned in some western part of the Sudan, which North Southern is there. So it is just a clear manifestation that simply a problem between 2 tribes, 2 descendants of respective tribes could really get the entire tribe into it, and this is part of the development that we're lacking. So this is also getting more momentum when you think of the war.
Sure.
And you know, the southern tribes, you know, the predominantly Dinka tribe and those nomads from the northern parts along the border, they did use to clash over grazing lands, which is a very, very legitimate cause of quarrel, because it has to do with life.
Yes.
So people did have ways of handling those difficulties in the past, that elders will come, they sit down, they identify who's been abducted, and then they put on, you know, sort of fines, or they put their own conditions. But now when the SPLA came, the Sudan People Liberation Army, they did, the movement tried to make use of those, you know, loopholes and get more damage to other tribes.
So now that we're being distracted by this, what are we in the world missing about Sudan that's great, and that what are we missing out about knowing about? What are the potential?
What we're missing over here is a country that has all the potentials. If you think of wealth underground, you're speaking of gold, you're speaking of, in fact, the Turco-Egyptians, they come to Sudan because of gold in the early days. Even the British come for the gold. You're also missing, if you think of today's technology, you're missing the oil, which is in Sudan. And in fact, it's everywhere.
Wow.
It's contrary to what is being manifested over here, that the oil is in the south and the government wants the oil to get into the north. No, the oil is in Khartoum, it's in the eastern part of Sudan, and Chevron knows it very well. Okay, so is this what we're missing over here? And we're missing, by missing that exploitation of these potentials, we're missing the opportunity of giving people a peace, or giving people the development which people do need. Because if you have means of development, if you have something that you can hold on to, then you don't go quarreling. So in a state of people waging war and talking about, you know, sending accusations against the government, against the people of Sudan, those should rather support the attempts that the current administration over here is doing. The Bush administration has begun with its appointing Senator Danforth as his presidential envoy for Sudan on peace, who has just completed his report, I think a week or 2 weeks ago. What has been leaked to the media shows clear that that the involvement of the United States behind the peace process is rather crucial, contrary to what has been happening before, that choosing sides. So more balanced involvement, engagement with the Sudanese government, exchange of full restoration of diplomatic ties will incite the foreign companies which
that you
really
need
help.
to come in.
Indeed.
And I'm going to tell you, the time has gone.
Oh, no.
But we got in the important parts about Sudan, I do believe. And I'm excited that you were able to come and teach us this little bit. And if you don't mind, maybe we can ask you to come back.
Oh, sure.
And we'll have a part 2, and we'll learn some more about Sudan.
Definitely, I would be very much here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I thank you, my audience, for being so attentive to the Ambassador of Sudan. And I'm so glad that you were able to be with us on this show. So stay tuned for another exciting show from Africa's Vision Network.